Farida Nabourema is the unequivocal voice of Togo's pro-democracy movement today. She is a human rights activist and writer who is bravely combating corruption and an oppressive military regime while galvanizing her people towards a democratic and progressive form of Pan Africanism. We discuss how France's neo-colonial currency of the CFA Franc props up and maintains a 50-plus year presidential dictatorship in Togo, and how citizens can use Bitcoin to circumvent authoritarian rule. Any countries still living under economic colonial rule today in 2021 deserves to have their stories heard and be given our support. There's much work to be done. And to Farida, I thank you. First, could we get a snapshot of Togo right now under the rule of the president, Farida Nabourema?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you for having me in your show. Togo has been ruled. I can actually provide a snapshot of the Nyasimbe's regime, like for Nyasimbe's regime, without starting from the beginning, because it's a continuation. So for Nyasimbe came to power in 2005, following the death of his father. And his father ruled Togo from 1967 to 2005. He spent 38 years in power. At the time he died in 2005, he was the longest serving president in the entire Africa. And when his son, who was 39 years old then, took over, he has been president since then, and he's currently the longest serving president in the West African region and the only president serving a fourth term in the West African region. So together, the Nyasimbe family has been in power for a total of 54 years, making them the oldest military regime in the entire Africa.
And how does that happen, and how is that able to continue for so many years?
Yeah. Togo became independent in 1960. It was the first country to vote against France in terms of demanding its independence on April 27, 1958, followed by Guinea, which voted on September 28, 1958 as well. But Togo became effectively independent on April 27, 1960, 2 years after the referendum in which it decided to obtain its independence from France. Initially, Togo was not a French colony. Togo was a German colony. And Togo and Cameroon were in the same situation as following World War I, when Germany lost the war to the French, the Brits, and their allies. The Togo was placed under the UN mandate, so it was literally like a UN colony, but under the tutorship of France. So France was supposed to be our tutor, welcoming us to independence. Togo and Cameroon were confided to the Brits and the French, and the western part of Togo will eventually decide to join the Gold Coast to form today's Ghana. And the eastern part of Togo chose full independence and is the Togo we have today. So the western part of Togo is about 1/3 of the size of the current Togo, and the French side is 2/3 of Togo, which is now Togo. So in 1960, when Sylvanus Olympio, the first president of Togo, became a president, he quickly understood that political independence is nothing without economic and monetary independence, because literally the French CFA system bind us still to France because they control all our trade, our imports, our exports, our currency rates, our conversion. They hold about over 60% of our reserves in their bank. And in addition, they hold another 15% to what they say to ensure that the convertibility of our currency. So literally, the CFA franc is bondage. It's like the United States being independent, but then the dollar being printed still by the Brits. and the British people deciding when to print more dollar or less, and the United States Reserve being in the Brits Bank. So you couldn't really call that an independence, because when there is an economic crisis, the Fed can decide to print more currency or less currency. They decide on the monetary policies, but we don't have all of that flexibility. So on December 12, 1962, the Parliament of Togo voted a bill which was which was supposed to retrieve Togo from the CFA currency and creating the Togolese franc, which will be our national currency. And that Togolese franc was supposed to come to effect a couple of months later, but then exactly 1 month after that bill was voted, in the 9th of January 13, from the 12th to January 13, 1963, the French government, under the leadership of President de Gaulle, sent former French colonial soldiers from Togo to assassinate the president of Togo, Eyadema Gnassingbé. Eyadema was killed. No, Sylvanus Olympio was killed by Eyadema, who was a former French soldier, and some of his colleagues. And they decided to replace him by a guy who was very prone to French colonialism, who coincidentally happens to be Sylvanus Olympio's brother-in-law. Sylvanus Olympio was married to his sister, and his name was Nicolas Gruniski. Nicolas Gruniski will rule Togo from 1963 to 1967. The Togolese people were fed up by his colonial policies. They stormed the street in January 1967, stating that, hey, we voted for independence some years ago, and you are bringing back the colonial policies, and we are still feeling like if we are still led by the French, we want you out. So the French, realizing that there was an uprising in the country, and if they don't act quickly, the independence leaders would take over again, and it would be hard for them to take control. They decided to topple their puppets, Nicolas Gruniski, by sending the exact same military soldiers from the colonial army to go and remove him from power. But because he was very close to France, he wasn't killed. He was just sent on exile. And Eyadema Gnassingbé will become president and rule for 38 years under the leadership and the support of France.
Wow. And literally, this is because President Olympio wanted to remove himself and remove the country from the CFA franc system. And the French government militarized the Togolese and trained them, and had a military coup to reinstate and maintain that system. And now that system has been running for the last 55 years plus, first with Gnassingbé and the father, and now his son. Now, could you tell a little bit about life in Togo and how the regime power sort of enacts their power over the country?
Togo is a military regime, a completely, absolutely brutal military regime, where citizens don't have freedom of speech, they don't have freedom of assembly, there's no freedom of the press. Literally, you criticize the government, you find yourself in prison if you're lucky. Worst case scenario, you can get killed and your body dumped in the sea, like it has been the case for countless Togolese activists and opposition leaders, as well as Togolese journalists. There's not a single year that the regime is not sanctioning and shutting down a media for reporting on a corruption case or a government abuse of power case. Activists get arrested for organizing any form of gathering. Anything as simple as a press conference requires the approval of the government, or you go to jail for it. In addition to that, the military regime of Togo is a colonial regime, actually, a colonial army, actually, because when we got our independence in 1960, some will call Olympio to be naive, some will call him an idealist, but he didn't want Togo to have an army. He had this sweet model in mind, and he said he wanted Togo to be a non-police state. And he was a very simple guy. He would go to the presidency to work sometimes riding his bike. At the time, he was one of the most literate presidents in the region. He spoke 6 languages fluently, including 2 local languages: French, English, Dutch, and German. He has a degree from the London School of Economics. He has an honorary degree from American University Law School. He was extremely progressive, a brilliant economist and intellectual, and he was an idealist. He believed that Togo, being such a small country, wouldn't require an army. We just need to have a local police to ensure that we have security. But he doesn't see as becoming one of those countries that were fighting the Western vs Eastern proxy wars during the Cold War era. But that was a mistake to some extent because he didn't have any protection. He didn't even have security guards at his house when the French sent their soldiers to kill him, and that's how they could easily assassinate him. So the French created the Togolese army, and the militaries of the Togolese army were all recruited from those that the French selected to serve them in their colonial army to fight nations that were fighting for their independence, such as Algeria, Vietnam, Madagascar, Syria, Lebanon, and others. So those soldiers were recruited to conduct mass murder and abuse and brutalize people for the interests of France. And when they were recruited to now serve the Togolese army, because they used to be French soldiers, even though they were African, now that they were serving the Togolese army, they have the same attitude. They are very brutal, they are very abusive, they are very savage. And some of them will openly say, well, when they were interviewed about some of their horrendous torture practices, they will say, well, we learned this from the French army. This is what we used to do in Algeria. And they thought it was normal because, well, that's what the white man does, which is fine to treat people like that. So the Togolese army going to that school and continuing till today to benefit from the exclusive training of the French army and the French government is extremely brutal. It is one of the most brutal armies in West Africa, to be honest, flat out. They don't joke, and we know that. And growing up in that atmosphere, it has turned the Togolese citizens to becoming extremely careful and aware of their surrounding, because we had a lot of spying around growing up, to the point where even in the comfort of our houses, we were not free to call the president by his name, because you don't know which neighbor could hear you out and could report you and your family being wiped away the next day. There were spies in classrooms wearing students' uniforms, and they were actually working for the government. There were spies in bars, nightclubs, taxis. So the citizen felt constantly like they were being watched, they were being listened to, they were being surveilled. And that created an atmosphere of fear and inability for citizens to freely express their minds or take any form of action. And even for some Togolese in the diaspora, that fear continues because they are afraid that if they do something, the government will retaliate against their families back home. But I will say that with the rise of the internet, people are less afraid than they used to 10, 15, 20 years ago. But we are still not where I would want us, the people of Togo, to be yet.
Mm-hmm. And I think with communication channels opening up, the internet, Twitter, to be able to highlight these social causes and to give a true look of what's happening on a grassroots level is very illuminating, and it gets across the world. It's gotten definitely to America, gotten to us in BBB. And so we're all finding ways of how to help the system, and our gear is towards the economics. And there is a dictatorship in Togo, but we're looking at the power that's above that emboldens and supports through military resources and then also through financial assets.
Right.
And that is the CFA franc system. And for those who don't know too much about it, the CFA franc is convertible to, at first, it was with the French franc, right? But how it is established, it can't be convertible
Mhm.
to any international foreign exchange markets, meaning
Mhm.
that all international trade is mediated by the French Treasury.
Right.
So, for example, just to give a thought to it. So, for example, if I'm in Cameroon or
Mhm.
if I'm in Togo and I have a resource, let's say ore, iron, phosphate, and I want to sell it to a Bulgaria, I want to sell it to China.
Mhm.
First, like if I send the phosphate $1 million worth, first I have to go to the French Treasury and say, "Hey, does France? Do you guys need this phosphate first? Because before we go to a third country, France gets first bid from that, and
Right.
if they decide, oh, we don't need that resource, okay, you can go to the third party. And even in that situation, the $1 million that we'll send to that Bulgaria will send to us for our resources, they have to first send it to the French Treasury, and
Right.
then as euros, and then transfer the euros to the CFA franc.
Right.
So the French is in the middle of every export and
Transaction.
import for all its former colonies.
Right.
And like, as we would say, is like, why you need it? Mind your business. Mind your business. You don't need to be in between trade between one sovereign nation and another sovereign nation, between two sovereign nations, if they're truly sovereign nations.
Yes,
Correct?
and you will even be shocked to hear that the citizens of the countries that use CFA currency, and there are 15 countries right now in Africa, French former French colonies, um, they cannot own foreign currencies in their bank unless they obtain the approval of their Minister of Treasure. And when they obtain that authorization, before the minister obtain that authorization, he has to consult with the Federal Reserve, like the National
Mhm.
Reserve of the bloc,
And the
which
operation accounts that's out there.
yeah,
Right. Hmm.
has to be approved by the French. So literally, before any citizen could say, "I want to have $500," you need the approval. Or I have to have £500, you need the approval. Like you cannot open a foreign account without the approval. And the very funny thing is that the first president of Togo, who the French killed in 1963, he was actually arrested in prison in 1952 because he was in possession. He opened a foreign bank account in neighboring Ghana, and he had the British pounds in his account in Ghana. And the French found out, he was arrested, he was put in prison, and he was denied of a right to vote and to run for office. And amazingly, he didn't run for office, but he was still elected president. So it's a very funny story, but that is continuing till today. Being a citizen of Togo and living in Togo and having a foreign account that you don't declare to the state is actually a crime, and you can go to jail for it. And it is the same
Right.
thing in all the French colonies. This is a way for them to control every single resource that the citizens have, and to have a chunk of it, because which whenever you are taking back your money back, then you have to pay a conversion rate that they make profit from. And this profit alone is estimated to be more than 40 million euros a year. So that is a huge amount of money, in addition to
Right.
what they are holding permanently. I also mentioned that they have 60% of our reserves in their bank. Like we have the gold, but they keep it for us, and we never have access to it. Now, when we need more money because we are going through economic hurdles, like it is the case right now with COVID-19, most of the countries are going through recession, we have to take a loan from France from our own money. Like the French will loan us our own money with interest, and we pay them back with interest. And this is somebody holding your savings and telling you that you need to pay an interest because before you can access your savings. So the system was
It's robbery.
completely, it is robbery.
Yeah,
It is
yeah.
completely abusive. And it was created in such a way that it will ensure that the French continues to milk its colonies until today. And they have been doing that now for over a century.
Absolutely. And the lack of transparency there is
Right.
in those trades. I mean, it said that France is siphoning over $400 billion from its
Mhm.
African former colonies a year. So it's basically a parasitic trust because the
Right.
60% of treasury reserves that's held in the French central banks, these African nations don't have any transparency to how they're spending it, the
Right.
money, and how they're using it. And they just have to go off of faith. As well as we mentioned, all exports have to be paid first to
Right.
the French central bank, and then it's converted to the CFA franc, and then transported to the African colonies, former
Right.
colonies. France has first bid on all mining resources from their former African colonies. They just don't have access to it. So when we
Mhm.
talk about sovereignty and independence, it's financial independence.
Mhm.
I think that's number one. And then you can tackle the more immediate
Mhm.
issues and threats that's happening locally. But when Tongolese locals, they understand this system that they're in, like, how does change happen? What's stopping the people from maybe believing they could be actors of change within the surrounding circumstances? Or is that happening right now today?
That is happening right now. And it has always been happening. The Togolese have been resisting the French for as far as I can remember. The first uprising against the French in Togo was in 1933, and it was led by Togolese women who opposed the French rising taxes against them. And it was an uprising that led the women to actually completely destroy the French administration building. They destroyed the prisons and they freed the Togolese citizens that were held in prison then. And it was the first time in the region that women actually staged what I would call a coup. But it was successful before they came back with more soldiers that were deployed from neighboring French colonies to increase their grips on power and ensure it doesn't happen again. Following that, there was a huge civil resistance from 1946, right after the end of World War II. And that's what led Togo to becoming the first country in the French colonies to demand independence. It was Togo. And they forced the French, they petitioned the United Nations, held a referendum in 1958, and they won that referendum. Countless of people were arrested in the process, were tortured, were jailed. My own grandfather would walk he would walk over 200 miles with his friends just to attend rallies against the French. He spent several years in prison, not just months. He literally spent time in prison and didn't see his children grow. He was arrested on multiple occasions, and it wasn't just him. There were thousands of them that were constantly arrested. Some of them that were even unlucky were deported out of the country to other countries, and they lost touch with their families still today. The French were literally practicing slavery in those colonies. It wasn't colonialism because people were taken by force to work for them in the plantation. If you don't get the amount of crop they required of you, they flog you, they cut your arms or your legs as a punishment. And in the worst cases, they could even kill you in front of your children or kill your sons because they knew people held their children, especially the male ones, very highly. So it was full blown slavery, but it was called colonialism because slavery was officially abolished and they couldn't use that word anymore. The people of Togo have never stopped fighting, but how we were a small country at independence, Togo was less than 1 million people, and today we are averaging 8 million people. With our resources, overcoming the French was extremely difficult, and it still is because their regime is extremely pervasive, and they have many ways of controlling citizens, punishing citizens, abusing citizens, etc. And when this regime came to power, they continued doing the exact same thing the French did, which was when they arrest an opposition leader, they will beat him in public, they will humiliate them, they will kill them, expose their bodies in public just to create fear among the citizenry. But that fear and abuse didn't actually stop people from rising. If you go to Google and you Google Togo protest 2017, you will see how the Togolese protested for several months by huge numbers. At some point, there were over 1 million Togolese on the streets in 14 different cities simultaneously. And having 1 million people in the streets out of 8 million national population, that's like
Yeah.
1 in 8 Togolese was
Yeah,
out.
1/8. Yeah.
That's and for a country where about 70% of the population is under the age of 35, that's literally 1 in 4, 1 in 2 adults being outside in the streets protesting. So the Togolese were determined, but then each time they rise, the level of repression that they face, at some point, the people cannot sustain it anymore, and the regime ends up consolidating power, especially with the help of the French government. There's also even a video you'll find on YouTube in 2012 where a Togolese journalist was being attacked by Togolese soldiers, and that the Togolese soldiers were instructed by a French military wearing a French uniform. He's a colonel, a major colonel in the French colonial army, instructing Togolese armed forces to beat up the journalists, and it was filmed and it was online. That was actually the only time they were caught on camera. But we grew up seeing French militaries in our street participating in street repression. It's literally like if you have the British Army coming to America to help the American soldiers repress protesters. That would cause an uproar. But it happens in countries like Togo. And nobody hears about it because, first of all, how many people speak French outside of the French colonies? Like today, the French language is sustained thanks to the French colonies. There are about 380 million speakers of French in the world today, and out of those, about 300 million are in Africa. So literally, without the Africans, the French language will be almost dead by now. So outside of our community, you don't really hear our stories. The only media that often report on our stories are the French media, and they cover the stories in a way that it always arrange their country because most of the French media are owned by the French government as well, especially the international media like RFI, France 24, TV5 Monde. They are government-sponsored media, and the way they choose to report on African stories have to align with their foreign policy and how they want to sell France and portray France to the world. So our stories are silenced. Our resistance are completely blacklisted. So we have been resisting in darkness for ages, and nobody knows, and nobody's listening, and nobody's watching. At some point, people get tired, and then they take a break, and they rest for maybe a year or two, and they are back on the street again. And it has always been like that. In Togo, there were uprisings in 2005 following the death of Eyadema Gnassingbé when his son did a coup. The Togolese protested, and over 1,000 Togolese citizens were killed. If based on our population back then, if 1,000 Togolese citizens were killed, that would be like 30,000 Americans getting killed. It's a huge number based on our population. Soldiers went to home, beating citizens, especially the women, abusing them and killing their children. They beat children as young as 3 weeks old baby, simply because they wanted to hurt the parents. from 2005, we had another uprising in 2010. Then there was a third uprising from 2012 to 2013, and a fourth one, which was the biggest one, in 2017 and 2018. And I know there will be another uprisings because the people of Togo are determined to be free and they are determined to end their abuse. But they get exhausted, which is normal. They run out of resources, which is normal. But I will always say that the regime in Togo may be winning battles, but at the end of the day, they will not win the war because you cannot eternally continue to abuse people. And for as long as they have the will to be free, it may take decades or even centuries, but eventually they are going to be there.
Right. I mean, there's a couple of places I want to take this. Well, number one, that's why we have platforms like this to amplify these stories and to get the full unadulterated history from the people who have lived these circumstances, right? And to provide a platform and to just amplify the voice. So that's number one. And then also understanding that the fight for liberation is long. It's
Yeah,
long. It
very
is a long
interesting.
journey. It's a lot of obstacles, a lot of challenges
Right.
along the way. But the human spirit can never be counted out, right? And it always pushes towards freedom. And our platform is a platform on freedom, more specifically, economic freedom with the emergence of Bitcoin. And there are different countries, there's different citizens in various countries who are using Bitcoin as a tool of liberation to peacefully opt out of oppressive central control.
Mhm.
I'm just curious to hear is there's people within your circles and Togolese citizens who are learning about Bitcoin, being educated, maybe using it as another form of protest to the oppressive system that exists today.
Mhm. Yes, there are a lot of people who are using the Bitcoin in Togo, and it's pretty recent, but the numbers
Right.
are, would say, satisfying. There was even a very recent study that was published about just a couple of weeks ago, which was actually showing that in the whole of West Africa, Togo has the highest user rate of Bitcoins.
Hmm.
I was actually shocked. I didn't know that the usage of Bitcoin was that big in Togo. But well, of course, the percentage is based on the quota of the population. But then, based on that quota, the Togolese were using the Bitcoin, were the highest. Like literally, in the whole of Africa,
Mhm.
Togo came first, and Togo is in the top 10 worldwide of countries where the Bitcoin is being used the most.
Right.
And I found that to be something very positive, because it means that people are looking for alternative ways of exchanging transactions, using money, saving money, and investing as well, and trading as well. But that will need to, what my fear right now is that the government of Togo becoming aware of something like this could try to find a way to block it. And if they do, that could be detrimental. So there are people like Fode, for example, who are working really hard to create Bitcoin exchange platform that use the mesh system, so that in case the government wants to shut down access to certain Bitcoin websites or to the internet as a whole, people could still have access to their money and still be able to exchange their Bitcoins. One thing I know for sure is that once people have a good understanding of what Bitcoin is, and I will call it Bitcoin literacy, once they have the
Mhm.
Bitcoin literacy, there is no way they will want to continue using the CFA as their money. So
Correct.
I
Yeah.
am also currently building a program that aims at increasing awareness about Bitcoin, and also offering training possibilities for Togolese youth who can educate others on what Bitcoin is. Because sometimes people have a misconception that Bitcoin money is illegal money and it can get you to jail. And since you are already used to being sent to jail very easily in Togo, people are careful about certain things. But then when you see the numbers, it shows that there's still a huge amount of people who are determined to use it, and this is good news for us. Good news for us because it's going to offer us some form of independence over how we're using our money, and also some form of privacy as well, because the regime in Togo has actually led many citizens to refuse to having a bank account, because after getting arrested for their political activities, all their money was seized by the government until they lost their money, they lost their properties. It happened to a lot of people. So for that reason, people opted to not have bank accounts at all, because they would rather keep their money at home or with friends or with family or hid it somewhere in a farm than have the government confiscate it. But then with Bitcoin, they have options, and we want people to know that with Bitcoin, they are using a currency that isn't owned by any government, and
Right.
even
Completely
more,
decentralized.
yes, it's not
Mhm.
owned by the French government, because their case is the worst one, and it is a currency that they could use without needing to necessarily convert to another currency before they can purchase something with it. Like you can buy something from China or India or USA using the Bitcoin. You wouldn't need to go and turn your CFA to euro and then your euro to dollars or euros to pounds before you can make that transaction. So when people will know about all those benefits, and they will understand it, they'll be happier to use Bitcoin to be able to transact. And we live in a continent where mobile banking is very big. Over 80% of our population doesn't have bank accounts, but you have at least half of them who have mobile banking accounts. So literally, people keep their money in their cell phones and they send money via their cell phones.
Digital wallets. Mhm.
Yes, so the Bitcoins literally operates the same way. And once they will have easily accessible platforms that will allow them to use the Bitcoin on their mobile wallet, it's even going to make things easier for them, and they will understand that, hey, there is an option for you, and this is something you can start using at different levels.
Right. And that's the work that we're trying to do at BBB is Bitcoin education, Bitcoin
Mhm,
literacy, as you're
mhm,
saying, and all of its benefits. Depending on what country you come from and what your challenges that you have. I know for Tonga,
mhm,
40% of their GDP actually comes from remittance. So
mhm,
they're working to put some sort of Bitcoin legislation. I was talking to Lord Fisitua.
mhm,
He is a parliament member in Tonga. And he was saying that, 30 to 35% of the remittance that they get in is transaction fees. So just by changing the payment rails to Bitcoin, where you can send $1,000, $10,000, and the
mhm.
transaction fee will be like a couple satoshis, which is like a couple of pennies.
Yeah,
You're saving that transaction fee, that 30% that would
right.
have gone to a Western Union is
Mhm,
now going to the people who need it most. So that's a solving issue there. Now, for other people, when it comes to the unbanked, right? As you said, 80% of Tongolese are unbanked. As long as you have a cell phone and internet connection, you can have a digital wallet, or log into exchange, and you have a Bitcoin wallet, and you can send and receive for basically no money at all instantly. So that just opens up the financial capabilities of people, globally. And the third use case, and that's what's also that's also happening in El Salvador right now. Now that Bitcoin is legal tender, the third case is the use of as a humanitarian tool, right? If you look in Nigeria, the NSARS movement, which was a protest against police brutality that was happening in Nigeria, the president actually decided to stop the bank accounts. He told all the banks in the country, the national banks, that any money that would go to the NSARS movement, make sure you cut those transactions, right? Because they just basically wanted to just stop any of the financial allocation to this movement. And they did that. But the leaders of the NSARS movement said, okay, well, we're going to use Bitcoin. So they said, now since our bank accounts are shut down, instead, if you want to help support this movement, send it in Bitcoin to our X, Y, and Z wallets. And I think last year they had they raised over $300,000 in Bitcoin, right? So they were able to continue their social movement. So these are a few of the ways that people in different areas, different parts of the world are using Bitcoin who truly, truly need it. So I just hope and I advocate this as one of the tools that citizens can use. But as you were saying, I 100% agree. Number one is education. Like, what is it and why is it valuable and how you can use it and why is it better than the alternative system? Because once you are gaining independence over your own finances, then you can make better choices for you and your family. So I definitely wanted to have you on, Farida, because the great work that you do. I definitely want to, as BBB, help support in any way that we can amplify or help with education. You might have to help me with my French, I might have to brush off or have a little translation. I don't know how that works. I might have to take a couple of courses from you. But that's some of the things that us as an organization, BBB, are trying to do. Like we have contact with people in Bermuda, Nigeria, Tonga, as I was saying, Fode Diop in Senegal, and just help advocate for this new system that will help people liberate themselves from financial suppression. So yeah, definitely let us know anything that we can do. Lastly, what are things that you are doing right now in terms of current projects that's happening? Any way that people can help initiatives that you're currently working on?
Yes, maybe I will sound a little, well, I don't think so, but my priority right now is to actually get Togolese women to use the Bitcoin. The reason why is because the
We
Togolese
definitely got to
women,
help. We got to help with this, but go ahead.
Togolese women have always been the wallet of the nation, and I am not saying it to flatter us, but historically, because our women have always been involved in trade, in many households, they are the main breadwinner, and they have more money than the men because of the economic activities that they're involved in, and in fact. The first billionaires we had in Togo were women, and
Wow, that's
they are
amazing.
called
Okay.
Nana Benz, and Nana Benz actually means women's driving Benz. Like they all had Mercedes Benz back in the 60s, and they were the first billionaires of Togo, and they were all traders, and they were trading in textile. And in 2013, the government of Togo actually burnt down the Togolese, the largest market in Togo, in order to punish these women because they were accused of sponsoring opposition protests. And that has been the truth, because since the colonial era, they were always the one providing the economic funds to the resistance, and they continue till day. When it comes to fundraising, it was Togolese women in the market that provide the money for protests, for providing medical aid to protesters, for providing food, and even they were really good at even helping activists sneak out of the country, buying them tickets for them to be able to find a safe haven outside. So for the women playing such an important role in our economy, and then in our resistance, because they are the pockets of our resistance, I feel like they're the first person who really should know what Bitcoin is and who really should know how to transact in Bitcoins, especially since most of them are traders, and they are involved in pretty huge financial monetary transactions, and they understand how painful it is to be using a currency like CFA to be a global trader. So the project that I have designed has a goal of raising the literacy of Togolese women, business women, on how to use the Bitcoin, because I believe that if we get Togolese women and traders to start using Bitcoins and accepting Bitcoins as a form of payment, then naturally everybody else will follow, because
Right,
they are
right. They're the access point to the finances in the
Absolutely.
country. Got it.
Absolutely.
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay.
Mhm.
No, that's a great initiative. And if there's anybody who wants to get more information on this initiative and also keep up with the work that you're doing, where can they
Mhm.
find you?
My personal page is Nabourema, my last name, .com. They can also find me on Twitter, or they can just email me on contact@nabourema.com as well. But I think I'm pretty easily accessible on social media, especially when it comes to Twitter. Yeah.
All right. All right, Frida. Thank you so much. And I'm going to be looking for these French lessons. Okay. So you give me a French 101,
Even
start
though
slow on me.
even though initially I wouldn't want to teach you French, because I have enough resentment against French to not want to teach this language to anyone.
Yeah. I mean, we got our own gripes with America. So come on. You already
Right.
know. And the reason why I speak English. So yeah, this is always somewhere. But thank you so much. The work that you do is absolutely beautiful. And any way that we can support, we're here for you. So I thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.